So, I'm a developer. You can tell by the quality of my slides. And because I'm a developer, I think technology choices are obviously the most important choices you can make, the vital piece to your project. And I've been writing single-page applications for quite a few years now. So I thought, for this, we could have a look at how you choose a single page versus a multi-page application, what are all the details there. But we don't really have time for that. So instead, what I'm going to do is talk you through my gut instinct. When I come to a project and people go, oh, should we use React? Should we build this as a single-page app? There is this small little piece of information that I hope I've boiled down into this short talk, which guides my thinking on that. So that's what I'm going to try and deliver to you today. So let's start off with what is a single-page app. So that's when you offload all the navigation and rendering of your website to JavaScript. Basically, if you're looking at tools like React or Angular, you're sort of on the right lines. You don't have to use those single-page applications, but generally people do, because that's the modern way to write web apps. Well, I don't know. Is it? Let's see if we can put a number on it. So here's my attempt. We used to do single-page applications using the hash part of the URL. So at the very end of the URL, you have a hash, and then you've got your anchor tags. And that's how we used to control which pages were displayed to you using JavaScript. And in 2009, Google came up with a scheme, a structure for those URLs so that they could index those pages more easily. So clearly, by 2009, which is a while ago, we were already, this was prolific enough that Google needed a plan in order to deal with it. And then you fast forward to 2010, you start seeing MVC frameworks, you've got Backbone, Angular's first release, who knew it was that long ago, Twitter, big brands starting to take on hash-based URLs, single-page web apps. The browsers start getting new APIs to deal with changes in the URL that we can pick up with JavaScript. We get Chrome introducing the history API, which is what we use today. And, that was 7 years ago. So surely by now we should have a pretty good idea on, what the pros and cons are of a single-page app, and when to use them and when not to. But I think, and I'm guilty of this myself, we don't always examine those reasons. So why are we increasingly building single-page apps? Here are a few of my top picks. The first one's browser support. So as I just said, in 2010, we got the history API, which is how we change pages using JavaScript. That's now had 7 years to get into all the browsers that we use, and it's got widespread support. So we're starting to see good support for all the features we need for them. And the next one, I think this could be a whole talk in itself, is there's an amazing ecosystem out there of JavaScript tools and libraries that is very seductive. The thing is, as you start to use them, it pulls you in, and you start writing more and more of your applications in JavaScript. So whereas previously we had multi-page applications, so separate pages, they were tied together using protocols like HTTP, structured data like HTML, whereas now it's coming inside the frameworks. What we're doing instead is pulling in those browser features and using JavaScript APIs to tie our applications together. What's special about JavaScript APIs? You call them from JavaScript. So you have to increasingly write your tooling in JavaScript the more you use. And similar things like this is Babel, which lets you write. Who uses Babel? Come on. OK, quite a few people. Yes, that lets you write the modern versions of JavaScript and backport it to existing browsers. And much like pulling more of browser features into frameworks, these tools are really seductive and nice to use. You get a lot of great features, but they're very hard to get rid of. If you want to stop using Babel, you have to go back and rewrite your entire application in the oldest version of JavaScript supported by your browsers. So anyone who invested in CoffeeScript will know how painful that is. So yeah, very easy to get into the JavaScript world, quite difficult to get out once you get there. And last one's fashion. Fashion is important in the tech industry. We like to pretend that we're pure entities of logical thought. But fashion's important, and it's important to me. You can see here is a man with a keyboard sewn into his trousers, which is what I think fashion looks like. But we shouldn't, we developers perhaps pretend that it's not a big deal, but it is important. It gets enthusiasm and critical mass around ideas, and that's how these ecosystems build up. It's just that it often moves on more quickly than our projects do, so perhaps don't want to be led by it too much. And the last reason that I want to bring up regarding single-page applications is cost. People often say that they're quicker, faster, cheaper to write. And I would say yes, sometimes, because there are trade-offs. So, sorry, I should have given the designers in the room a trigger warning. This is my personal website. Sorry about that. It's beautiful. But this is just a very standard multi-page application. It's static. There's no JavaScript whatsoever on there, despite me being a JavaScript developer. It's not really appropriate. So these are the things I get for free on my personal website by doing it the old-fashioned way. I get a back button. OK, you get that with a single-page app too, but this back button is amazing. When I click it, I immediately get the previous page. It doesn't request data in the background and then re-render it. No, it's there straight away. And it remembers where I was scrolled to on the page. Not only that, it will fill form elements with the values that I had on there last time. It's an amazing back button with loads of features. I get loading indicators, and it's not just a spinner that I add before I make an AJAX request. This actually represents, real status of my requests. It depends on my network connectivity. That's really nice. And I get the ability to cancel requests while they're in flight. Almost no single-page apps let you do that, which is really nice when you're on a mobile connection and things are loading in slowly and the page is jumping around and you're worried about your data caps. So all of these features I get for free by doing it as a multi-page application, and almost no single-page applications do all of those correctly. So if you're kind of trading all these advantages that you get from the browser by doing it the old-fashioned way, what do you get by doing it the single-page app way? So I think these are the top highlights in my experience. And the first one is to do with state. So where previously you would have to bundle together all the information about your application and the state that it's in and send it up to the server in order to get the next page back. Now you can hold it in memory, you can make small incremental changes over time, which is really nice if you've got long sessions, people looking at the page for a long time, and lots of small updates happening to it. Likewise, responsiveness. You've got these big requests happening at the start where you pull down all the assets for your single-page app. But once they're in memory, it's really quick to present changes to the user, which is great for engagement and also performance. This is performance when things are going well, generally is how it works with single-page apps. So assuming you've got good connections and it's reliable and it's fast, then you can actually reduce some of the boilerplate. You don't have to pull down the header and footer of your page every time. That kind of thing. So I think, looking back at the timeline, it can be tempting to see it as a progress bar, where over time, with increasingly used JavaScript, more and more people are using single-page applications. It's just the future. But actually, I think it's more of a continuum. Anywhere on this spectrum of applications could be legitimate for your project, depending on what's important to you. In reality, you might start with server-rendered pages and progressively enhance them with JavaScript so you get more reactive experience. Or you might write a single-page app and start writing fallbacks that you get server-side rendering so that search engines can index your pages more easily. You can get more compatibility with devices, things like that. There's just one problem. While we can kind of mitigate these issues with each approach by adding on development work, it takes effort. So as you progressively enhance or as you add graceful degradation to your application, you're duplicating things that you've already done, generally. So you're either taking code that's running on the client and you're running it on the server to provide fallbacks, or you're taking server-side code and you're copying it into the client so that you've got fast reactive updates for the user. And all that takes work. So you can imagine if your application really values quick, responsive feedback, and you started out doing this as server-side rendered pages, you have got one hell of an uphill battle coming your way. And it's no wonder that teams in those situations decide, oh, we're just going to rewrite it in React. It might be the right thing to do. So should I use an SPA? I think it all comes down to this one point regarding reactivity. Here's my attempt at defining what a web app is, because the more web app-like your application, I think the happier you will be with a single-page app. So what is a web app? And I think it's all to do with those intermediate states. I'll give you an example. So, sorry, back to my home page. My page here is very transactional. You click on a link, you read it. You do basically nothing till the next link arrives. Here is another application where if I were to take a pen and place it on the page and move it to somewhere else, I don't just want to know the end result. The most important thing is actually every incremental step, all the flow in the way up to it, and that is the crucial point. So applications where that progression of change is important, so we're talking video conferencing, games, dashboards that live update, things like that. The more like that your application is, the happier it will be with a single-page app. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Caolan. You can see we changed gears on you quite quickly there. We went from sort of a very business-style presentation to a very, very technical presentation. I'm going to queue up maybe some questions before I just ask one of Caolan myself. Maybe we're looking for some technical questions from people that are implementing SPAs for themselves, something to ask Caolan. And a sort of separate direction, maybe if there are designers in the audience that have comments on the pros and cons of an SPA, or could just comment on having worked on one recently. I'll just sort of leave those with you for a second. But let me ask first of all, when you are chatting to maybe a small client for the first time, how do you start to position them on that continuum from server-side through progressive all the way to SPA? How do you articulate the value of an SPA to them?
So generally when a client comes to talk to me, they're usually quite sold on a heavily JavaScript-orientated stack, because that's my experience.
So how have they made that decision? How have they...
Exactly. And it tends to be a mix of things. Often it does come down to, passion and the experience of the team, what the team's excited about, what their developers are excited about.
Do you have to jump in and disabuse them of things and say, actually, we're not going to build you an SPA because you've made these wrong assumptions?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And it's about dialing it back a little bit or approaching it from the other angle. So sometimes I will advocate that we start with server-rendered pages and we'll add this interactivity incrementally and just see how far we get. And I think that's the way, when you get this feeling that this is going to be a real battle, because you're going to start with everything on the client side, and you're just going to have to continually pull it back into the server, you can sometimes persuade them that approach it from the other direction, we'll still aim for the same position,
okay.
And that will persuade them.
So it's easier to move in that direction rather than the other one?
Yeah.
Cool, thank you. I'm looking out to the audience. Any technical questions on SPAs? Yes, please.
So I think there's 2 points there. The first is that it's easier on the server often, I think, because it's enforced to be stateless, right? HTTP does not inherently involve state, and so you have to be very careful about what you're keeping in memory, and you have to serialize all the requirements for your application and send it off and get the results back. So now with modern JavaScript frameworks, you'll see React and Redux, things like that, are essentially doing a very similar thing in making all the state explicit. And that can really help give you that structure and make your applications more predictable. And the second point is to do with sharing code between the server and the client side, which is, I mean, I agree. Up until now, the solution most people use is to use Node.js and basically emulate the browser on the server, which is not always a satisfying solution. It works great as a fallback, as a backup option. I think we could be doing a lot more to share the views that we write on the server with the client side.
Cool, thank you. Good question, very in-depth. I'd like to hear from a designer or a UX person, please. A comment on that side of things for an SPA. Does it complicate things? Does it add to the mix? What are the pros and cons? Yes, please.
Yeah, I think traditionally we have done quite static wireframes, and one thing I have noticed, so I'm not a designer, so it's not really my area, but one thing I have noticed is I'm seeing a lot more videos and animations in wireframes and bug reports, things like that, because of this very dynamic nature where all the intermediate steps are actually pretty important. So yeah, I don't know what the answer is, but it's an interesting point.
Cool. That's all we've got time for. Thank you very much, Caolan. Another round of applause, please.